Part One, Section 4 of The Maine Woods, by Henry David Thoreau. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part One, Ktaadn, Section 4. Old Fowler's on the Millinocket, 6 miles from McCausland's, and 24 from the Point, is the last house. Gibson's on the Sowadnehunk is the only clearing above, but that had proved a failure, and was long since deserted. Fowler is the oldest inhabitant of these woods. He formerly lived a few miles from here, on the south side of the West Branch, where he built his house 16 years ago, the first house built above the Five Islands. Here our new batteau was to be carried over the first portage of 2 miles, round the Grand Falls of the Penobscot, on a horse sled made of saplings, to jump the numerous rocks in the way. But we had to wait a couple of hours for them to catch the horses, which were pastured at a distance, amid the stumps, and had wandered still farther off. The last of the salmon for the season had just been caught, and were still fresh in pickle, from which enough was extracted to fill our empty kettle, and so graduate our introduction to simpler forest fare. The week before they had lost 9 sheep here out of their first flock, by the wolves. The surviving sheep came round the house and seemed frightened, which induced them to go and look for the rest, when they found 7 dead and lacerated, and 2 still alive. These last they carried to the house, and, as Mrs. Fowler said, they were merely scratched in the throat, and had no more visible wound than would be produced by the prick of a pin. She sheared off the wool from their throats, and washed them, and put on some salve, and turned them out; but in a few moments they were missing, and had not been found since. In fact, they were all poisoned, and those that were found swelled up at once, so that they saved neither skin nor wool. This realized the old fables of the wolves and the sheep, and convinced me that that ancient hostility still existed. Verily, the shepherd boy did not need to sound a false alarm this time. There were steel traps by the door, of various sizes, for wolves, otter, and bears, with large claws instead of teeth to catch in their sinews. Wolves are frequently killed with poisoned bait. At length, after we had dined here on the usual backwoods fare, the horses arrived, and we hauled our batteau out of the water, and lashed it to its wicker carriage, and throwing in our packs, walked on before, leaving the boatman and driver, who was Tom's brother, to manage the concern. The route, which led through the wild pasture where the sheep were killed, was in some places the roughest ever traveled by horses, over rocky hills, where the sled bounced and slid along, like a vessel pitching in a storm, and one man was as necessary to stand at the stern, to prevent the boat from being wrecked, as a helmsman in the roughest sea. The philosophy of our progress was something like this: when the runners struck a rock 3 or 4 feet high, the sled bounced back and upwards at the same time; but, as the horses never ceased pulling, it came down on the top of the rock, and so we got over. This portage probably followed the trail of an ancient Indian carry round these falls. By 2 o'clock we, who had walked on before, reached the river above the falls, not far from the outlet of Quakish Lake, and waited for the batteau to come up. We had been here but a short time, when a thunder shower was seen coming up from the west, over the still invisible lakes, and that pleasant wilderness which we were so eager to become acquainted with, and soon the heavy drops began to patter on the leaves around us. I had just selected the prostrate trunk of a huge pine, 5 or 6 feet in diameter, and was crawling under it, when luckily the boat arrived. It would have amused a sheltered man to witness the manner in which it was unlashed, and whirled over, while the first waterspout burst upon us. It was no sooner in the hands of the eager company than it was abandoned to the first revolutionary impulse, and to gravity to adjust it; and they might have been seen all stooping to its shelter, and wriggling under it like so many eels, before it was fairly deposited on the ground. When all were under, we propped up the lee side, and busied ourselves there whittling thole pins for rowing when we should reach the lakes, and made the woods ring, between the claps of thunder, with such boat songs as we could remember. The horses stood sleek and shining with the rain, all drooping and crestfallen, while deluge after deluge washed over us. But the bottom of a boat may be relied on for a tight roof. At length, after 2 days' delay at this place, a streak of fair weather appeared in the northwest, whither our course now lay, promising a serene evening for our voyage; and the driver returned with his horses, while we made haste to launch our boat and commence our voyage in good earnest. There were 6 of us, including the 2 boatmen. With our packs heaped up near the bows, and ourselves disposed as baggage to trim the boat, with instructions not to move in case we should strike a rock, more than so many barrels of pork, we pushed out into the first rapid, a slight specimen of the stream we had to navigate. With Uncle George in the stern and Tom in the bows, each using a spruce pole about 12 feet long, pointed with iron, and poling on the same side, we shot up the rapids like a salmon, the water rushing and roaring around, so that only a practiced eye could distinguish a safe course, or tell what was deep water and what rocks, frequently grazing the latter on one or both sides, with 100 as narrow escapes as ever the Argo had in passing through the Symplegades. I, who had had some experience in boating, had never experienced any half so exhilarating before. We were lucky to have exchanged our Indians, whom we did not know, for these men, who, together with Tom's brother, were reputed the best boatmen on the river, and were at once indispensable pilots and pleasant companions. The canoe is smaller, more easily upset, and sooner worn out, and the Indian is said not to be so skillful in the management of the batteau. He is, for the most part, less to be relied on, and more disposed to sulks and whims. The utmost familiarity with dead streams, or with the ocean, would not prepare a man for this peculiar navigation; and the most skillful boatman anywhere else would here be obliged to take out his boat and carry round 100 times, still with great risk as well as delay, where the practiced batteau man pulls up with comparative ease and safety. The hardy voyageur pushes with incredible perseverance and success quite up to the foot of the falls, and then only carries round some perpendicular ledge, and launches again in the torrent's smoothness ere it dash below, to struggle with the boiling rapids above. The Indians say that the river once ran both ways, one half up and the other down, but that, since the white man came, it all runs down; and now they must laboriously pole their canoes against the stream, and carry them over numerous portages. In the summer all stores, the grindstone and the plow of the pioneer, flour, pork, and utensils for the explorer, must be conveyed up the river in batteau, and many a cargo and many a boatman is lost in these waters. In the winter, however, which is very equable and long, the ice is the great highway, and the logger's team penetrates to Chesuncook Lake, and still higher up, even 200 miles above Bangor. Imagine the solitary sled track running far up into the snowy and evergreen wilderness, hemmed in closely for 100 miles by the forest, and again stretching straight across the broad surfaces of concealed lakes. We were soon in the smooth water of the Quakish Lake, and took our turns at rowing and paddling across it. It is a small, irregular, but handsome lake, shut in on all sides by the forest, and showing no traces of man but some low boom in a distant cove, reserved for spring use. The spruce and cedar on its shores, hung with gray lichens, looked at a distance like the ghosts of trees. Ducks were sailing here and there on its surface, and a solitary loon, like a more living wave, a vital spot on the lake's surface, laughed and frolicked, and showed its straight leg for our amusement. Joe Merry Mountain appeared in the northwest, as if it were looking down on this lake especially, and we had our first, but a partial view of Ktaadn, its summit veiled in clouds, like a dark isthmus in that quarter, connecting the heavens with the earth. After 2 miles of smooth rowing across this lake, we found ourselves in the river again, which was a continuous rapid for 1 mile to the dam, requiring all the strength and skill of our boatmen to pole up it. This dam is a quite important and expensive work for this country, whither cattle and horses cannot penetrate in the summer, raising the whole river 10 feet, and flooding, as they said, some 60 square miles, by means of the innumerable lakes with which the river connects. It is a lofty and solid structure, with sloping piers, some distance above, made of frames of logs filled with stones to break the ice. Here every log pays toll as it passes through the sluices. We filed into the rude loggers' camp at this place, such as I have described, without ceremony, and the cook, at that moment the sole occupant, at once set about preparing tea for his visitors. His fireplace, which the rain had converted into a mud puddle, was soon blazing again, and we sat down on the log benches around it to dry us. On the well flattened and somewhat faded beds of arbor vitæ leaves, which stretched on either hand under the eaves behind us, lay an old leaf of the Bible, some genealogical chapter out of the Old Testament, and, half buried by the leaves, we found Emerson's address on West India emancipation, which had been left here formerly by one of our company, and had made 2 converts to the Liberty party. Here, as I was told, also an odd number of the Westminster Review for 1834, and a pamphlet entitled "History of the Erection of the Monument on the Grave of Myron Holley." This was the readable or reading matter in a lumberer's camp in the Maine woods, 30 miles from a road, which would be given up to the bears in a fortnight. These things were well thumbed and soiled. This gang was headed by one John Morrison, a good specimen of a Yankee, and was necessarily composed of men not bred to the business of dam building, but who were jacks at all trades, handy with the axe and other simple implements, and well skilled in wood and watercraft. We had hot cakes for our supper even here, white as snowballs, but without butter, and the never failing sweet cakes, with which we filled our pockets, foreseeing that we should not soon meet with the like again. Such delicate puff balls seemed a singular diet for backwoodsmen. There was also tea without milk, sweetened with molasses; and so, exchanging a word with John Morrison and his gang, when we had returned to the shore, and also exchanging our batteau for a better still, we made haste to improve the little daylight that remained. This camp, exactly 29 miles from Mattawamkeag Point by the way we had come, and about 100 from Bangor by the river, was the last human habitation of any kind in this direction. Beyond there was no trail, and the river and lakes, by batteau and canoes, was considered the only practicable route. We were about 30 miles by the river from the summit of Ktaadn, which was in sight, though not more than 20, perhaps, in a straight line. It being about the full of the moon, and a warm and pleasant evening, we decided to row 5 miles by moonlight to the head of the North Twin Lake, lest the wind should rise on the morrow. After 1 mile of river, or what the boatmen call thoroughfare, for the river becomes at length only the connecting link between the lakes, and some slight rapid, which had been mostly made smooth water by the dam, we entered the North Twin Lake just after sundown, and steered across for the river thoroughfare, 4 miles distant. This is a noble sheet of water, where one may get the impression which a new country and a lake of the woods are fitted to create. There was the smoke of no log hut nor camp of any kind to greet us; still less was any lover of nature or musing traveler watching our batteau from the distant hills. Not even the Indian hunter was there, for he rarely climbs them, but hugs the river like ourselves. No face welcomed us but the fine, fantastic sprays of free and happy evergreen trees, waving one above another in their ancient home. At first the red clouds hung over the western shore as gorgeously as if over a city, and the lake lay open to the light with even a civilized aspect, as if expecting trade and commerce, and towns and villas. We could distinguish the inlet to the South Twin, which is said to be the larger, where the shore was misty and blue; and it was worth the while to look thus through a narrow opening across the entire expanse of a concealed lake to its own yet more dim and distant shore. The shores rose gently to ranges of low hills covered with forests; and though, in fact, the most valuable white pine timber, even about this lake, had been culled out, this would never have been suspected by the voyager. The impression, which indeed corresponded with the fact, was as if we were upon a high tableland between the States and Canada, the northern side of which is drained by the St. John and Chaudiere, the southern by the Penobscot and Kennebec. There was no bold, mountainous shore, as we might have expected, but only isolated hills and mountains rising here and there from the plateau. The country is an archipelago of lakes, the lake country of New England. Their levels vary but a few feet, and the boatmen, by short portages, or by none at all, pass easily from one to another. They say that at very high water the Penobscot and the Kennebec flow into each other, or at any rate that you may lie with your face in the one and your toes in the other. Even the Penobscot and St. John have been connected by a canal, so that the lumber of the Allegash, instead of going down the St. John, comes down the Penobscot; and the Indian's tradition that the Penobscot once ran both ways for his convenience is in one sense partially realized to‐day. None of our party but McCauslin had been above this lake, so we trusted to him to pilot us, and we could not but confess the importance of a pilot on these waters. While it is river, you will not easily forget which way is up stream; but when you enter a lake, the river is completely lost, and you scan the distant shores in vain to find where it comes in. A stranger is, for the time at least, lost, and must set about a voyage of discovery first of all to find the river. To follow the windings of the shore when the lake is 10 miles, or even more in length, and of an irregularity which will not soon be mapped, is a wearisome voyage, and will spend his time and his provisions. They tell a story of a gang of experienced woodmen sent to a location on this stream, who were thus lost in the wilderness of lakes. They cut their way through thickets, and carried their baggage and their boats over from lake to lake, sometimes several miles. They carried into Millinocket Lake, which is on another stream, and is 10 miles square, and contains 100 islands. They explored its shores thoroughly, and then carried into another and another, and it was a week of toil and anxiety before they found the Penobscot River again, and then their provisions were exhausted, and they were obliged to return. End of Part One, Section 4. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine.